across the nation with standards and what assessment tools to use to know what our students know from state to state. And so how do you think about how will we know? And the way I think about like ACT or SAT, that's sort of at the end of the game where we know every student is going to be eligible for some kind of financial aid or scholarship or whatever, but like on the way there, what tools are we going to use to know so that we can tell parents in our community that we're making progress? And then how does the tool we use here in Kentucky match with the tools that are going to be used in other states?
Well, I guess I would say, you know, it all starts with quality standards and assessment. And sometimes we've let compliance get in the way of that. And you know, this is why I'm not on John King's Christmas card list this year.
Not even
close. In fact, I might get another letter from him, but not on a Christmas card. Because we had a disagreement about that, about me checking a compliance box versus me giving a test that I believe showed what students really are learning in Kentucky. We're going to have some more conversations about that around math and reading and eventually social studies. But I think the tools that we use, though, we have to start thinking about it broader. I think that we try to do sometimes too much with the state test. We try to make it tell us too much. So that's why I'm saying for our accountability system, I want to open it up a little bit more. What are other measures that are actually showing us if kids are getting what they need? As far as comparability with other states, you know, we are not part of one of the consortia that other states are using, and I'm not real sure, to be perfectly honest with you, in this environment that we're in, how much those consortia are going to last. We do have things like NAEP. I'm looking more into how Kentucky can be a better participant in PISA. It's an international assessment to all 15-year-olds. So I mean, I think there are things like that we can use at least as a little bit of a proxy. But for now, for me, my focus is more about how can we ensure that we are having a quality system here for both assessment and accountability that that basically has that third pillar part of it, the integrity. That when we say to a kid, you are proficient in X, that we with confidence can say that they really are.
Yeah, I mean, Stephen raises a really important part. And there was a sort of theory behind the standards assessment and accountability that, you know, if you adopt good standards and you have a decent assessment, that teachers and schools will do what they need to do to get the kids to proficient on that assessment. That's not quite working out, as you undoubtedly know, and it's important for you to know as well. I was talking with folks a few minutes ago, especially with Susan Weston, about some work we've been doing that actually dips in and looks at the classroom level assignments that kids are getting. We've been looking at middle school and asking the question, okay, we're looking at 2 weeks worth of assignments for every teacher, and asking the question, okay, so how many of them were aimed at the standards that are appropriate for that grade level? So here's what we're finding, about 30%. So in a typical school building, somewhere between 30 and 40% of the assignments are at standards that are appropriate for the grade level, with the other 60 or 70% below. And in high poverty schools, situations typically worse. So clearly, we got to work on that, and it does begin to then raise the question of, are there some other, you know, essentially simple auditing functions that districts can do to actually get a look at what's happening in real classrooms? Because we don't change that, kids are not going to reach standards. I mean, the assumption is always, when you look at the proficiency data, you're saying, oh gee, teachers are teaching kids the standards, but still, in Kentucky, 4th grade reading, 60 or 50% of them still aren't getting there. But the truth is, they're not actually being taught to those standards in the first place. And that's the thing we need to change, and that takes more strength.
If I could just interject there too, we are working on, and this year are rolling out a new science assessment system, and we're doing something a little bit different in that we still have, of course, our summative assessments, but we are actually providing through course tasks in every grade. And they're not accountability. We aren't going to grade them, but every school is required to send us one piece of student work per grade. And the reason is for us to evaluate implementation as opposed to say we trained so many people, but actually for us to say, well, you know, actually you're grading this task way too easily. And so for us to be able to give some feedback to the schools and the districts about what quality is, eventually we'll, assuming we can pull this off, we're going to do the same in math and reading, but science is just the next one up. I know everybody accuses me of doing it because I'm a science guy, but it's just because it actually is the next thing up.
So you've mentioned parental involvement and driving adults to make the right decisions for students. But when it comes to stakeholder engagement, it seems to me that arguably students are the ones who are most affected by these educational policies. So what should and what could students do to become more involved in the decisions about these standards and policies that are being made and implemented?
Join the Pritchard voice team. Should we go first? So we actually have some students on some of our work groups. We are going to come to you guys that y'all have been meeting because y'all keep offering me pizza to come, and eventually I'm going to be able to do that. Come and sit with you and listen to you. I've doubled my number of students in my advisory board from when it was when I got here, because I do believe the student voice is one that people underestimate. When you get into accountability, people love to get into the psychometrics of it and all the math and all that, but at the end of the day, you've got to know why things are the way they are. And I'll tell you that one of the things that really sold me on the fact that there are some problems in unbridled learning were two students. There were two students that I met with when I was out in the schools, and the way current unbridled learning works, if you graduate college and career, you get an extra half-point bonus. And I'm meeting with, and this happened in two different places in the state, two different geographical places. And I had two young ladies, and one of them said, and both of them similar stories. So they said, you know, I am actually not being allowed to take advanced sciences and maths. I want to be a doctor. I want to be in healthcare. I'm being required to take culinary arts for a pathway to get my career readiness certificate. And I said, I'm sorry, what? And they said, you know, we're not being allowed to take AP biology, AP chemistry, AP calculus, even pre-calculus, because we have to have these three courses to graduate. And of course, they didn't necessarily know why that was, but I knew why that was because there was an extra point. Now, I could get into some more, mainly being that in both cases there were two young men sitting next to them who were in the same boat, also having to take career pathways, but for some reason they were allowed to take business and engineering. You can pay from that what you want to.
You have a question over here?
Oh, I haven't heard much talk about the price tag of all this, and as you move along, the changes to the process, are you also reevaluating the construction of the SEEK formula, or is that going to come later in the ballgame? Because it seems like that's a pressure point that the community can help sell and be supportive on.
Well, I mean, school funding is a problem. I think it's a problem across the country, but it has been for a long time. SEEK has been around since the 90s, and in a lot of ways I think it still serves some good purposes, but I think it's time to take a different look at it. I don't have the authority to do that. That's actually a legislative conversation. What I will tell you, though, is under ESSA, we have the opportunity to look at federal funding differently. And one of the things that we're going to push our districts on, and we're going to do it first and model it, is, you know, the days of thinking about Title I, Title II, Title III, and Title IV have got to go. Instead, what do we want to do? How are we going to close these achievement gaps? Now, let's look at the federal titles and figure out how we're going to pay for it. Instead of saying, well, I'm going to put, I'm going to have my Title I teacher here, and I'm going to, do a little bit of PD over here with Title II. Instead of going, let's look at this big picture. And we've got to model that at the Department of Ed, and we've got to stop thinking that way. But we also need to be able to give guidance to our districts and say, here's how you might do this. And that's something I think that historically KDE has been a little bit reticent to do, because we are, and I think you'll second this, every state loves to claim that they're local control. Kentucky is in a lot of ways. But that doesn't absolve me as commissioner or us as KDE from still trying to provide quality guidance and working with our districts to try to make better decisions.
Yeah, that's, I just want to echo that a little bit. Those federal dollars are the most flexible dollars you have.
Yeah.
And they ought to be the first place we go for improvement strategies. And when schools are looking at themselves against your new accountability system, that's where they start. But the other thing that's probably useful to do is you've got a more flexible pot of money this time for school improvements. 7% set aside. Unlike the old model, there's going to be less federal requirements and hopefully none actually on it. I think we'll probably be together on that side.
Yeah.
But
it's worth, together on most things, Katie.
Yeah, that's right. Just on the but you're going to be able to spot likely needs that schools will have as they try to stretch toward your new goals, and thinking about how to make sure they get the expertise, like whether there are ways of funding networks around schools that have problems with disproportionate discipline, whether there are problems with early reading that folks need more expertise for. So thinking creatively in advance about sort of what are those needs going to be, and how to be proactive in making sure there's expertise and capacity built in order to do that seems important.
And if I could just interject one thing there too. Right now the regulations for support versus supplant with these title funds are out for public review. The deadline for that is November 1st. Hopefully this week we'll be releasing basically what we're going to be saying. I would encourage all of you to, if nothing else, just go read our position. I imagine y'all are going to have a position on that?
Probably.
And the CCSSO, the Council of Chief State School Officers will. What I've charged my staff to do is actually to go look at the regs against what we do in Kentucky, so we can give some very specific Kentucky examples. So I would encourage any of you who are interested in that to just pay some good attention to that, because if there are too many, again, guardrails are good, we just got to be careful about concrete barriers.
So we're going to take 2 more questions, and then I'll have a wrap-up question for us. So, Susan?
I've been coming to Pritchard Committee meetings for 25 years. And I have a question, Dr. Pruitt, for 25 years from now, which is, when we convene, what is your intention for where we will be on proficiency for children of color and low-income children? Not your aspiration, but what do you intend for us to make happen?
I intend for us to close the achievement gap. I intend for us to I intend for there to be no excuses that anybody uses about color, about finances, about poverty. I can't tell you how sick I get when I hear people bring up, well, we've got these low poverty kids. Well, yeah, we do. We're going to keep having them if we don't do a better job educating them. I intend that years from now, we're going to say, if you're making bad decisions for kids, we're going to call you on it.
Okay, Elena, you have a...
Hi. I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. I'm really glad you brought up integrity, because historically, assessments have been a large part of the accountability system in general. And I just want to know how you all feel, if you're aware that schools are sort of tricking the system as far as, you know, they're aware that assessment is a large part of accountability, and there have been whole classes designed around preparing kids to score that proficient mark on exams like the Compass test. You know, you see college seniors who haven't met their benchmark for their junior year in ACT, so then as a senior, they're in a math class called Applied Math, or, you know, Math Basics, and it's an entire class designed to help students pass the Compass test so that the school can get points towards their accountability.
Well, I tell you, it's going to be hard to get past that if we don't start as a community realizing the best test prep is just good instruction. I mean, we've got to at some point figure that out. But we also have to have a system that drives us toward that, and not toward this idea of just test prep. We have a committee. I don't know if I haven't heard any other state that's doing this. I don't, but we have a committee called the Consequential Review Committee, and they're